Deep within the bowels of the earth, a vast underground cavern unfolds, its rugged walls punctuated by a series of dwellings that seem to defy gravity, clinging precariously to the rocky facade like swallows' nests. The protagonist sat cross-legged on the floor, his hands moving with a rhythmic intensity as he ground a mysterious substance into a fine powder, the soft crunch of the mortar and pestle echoing through the air. The MC's focus was disrupted by the persistent presence of a young girl who hovered beside him with an air of annoying curiosity. "Leave me be," he said gruffly, his tone a clear indication that he wished to be left alone. The girl's eyes sparkled with mischief as she suddenly thrust her hand into the grinder, her fingers closing around the substance within. The MC's eyes widened in alarm, but before he could react, the girl had withdrawn her hand and popped the substance into her mouth. Her face lit up with delight as she savored the taste, and a look of wonder crossed her features. "It's candy," she exclaimed, her voice filled with excitement. Our boy's patience snapped, and he shoved the girl away from him with a sudden burst of force. The girl's eyes widened in surprise as she stumbled backward, her legs tangling beneath her. She lost her balance and landed with a soft thud on the cold, hard ground, her buttocks smarting from the impact. The MC's face contorted in a mixture of annoyance and exasperation as he clicked his tongue in disgust. "This is medicine, not candy," he growled, his voice low and irritated, as he glared at the girl with a stern expression. The protagonist's scolding was cut short, however, as he realized that the girl had slumped into unconsciousness, the impact of her fall having been more severe than he had initially thought. Her body lay limp and still, her face pale and serene, as if she had simply fallen asleep. The MC's annoyance gave way to concern, and he felt a pang of guilt for having reacted so harshly. The MC muttered a curse under his breath, his frustration and annoyance boiling over. "She's a dense, stubborn fool," he thought to himself, shaking his head in exasperation. "She'll never understand." The girl's lips curled into a faint, enigmatic smile, and she murmured a barely audible phrase, "So fun." The MC's eyes narrowed, his mind racing with the implications. "She's a masochist," he thought to himself, a mixture of fascination and wariness swirling in his chest. The protagonist's frustration finally boiled over, and he let out a thunderous roar. "Get out of my place," he bellowed, his voice echoing off the walls as he gestured wildly towards the door. As the MC's outburst faded away, the attention of the surrounding crowd was drawn to the commotion. The underground lair, once a dimly lit and obscure space, was now revealed to be teeming with a multitude of disfigured individuals. Their bodies twisted and distorted, like grotesque parodies of human form, they seemed to blend into the shadows, their faces obscured by the faint, flickering torchlight. They appeared to be the macabre creations of a twisted dream, as if they had stepped straight out of a nightmare and into the dimly lit recesses of the underground lair. Their distorted forms seemed to defy the laws of nature, like the grotesque manifestations of a madman's imagination. The MC's gaze swept over the gathering of misshapen figures, and he couldn't help but wonder, what in the world am I doing here, surrounded by these abominations? His mind recoiled at the thought, and he felt a shiver run down his spine as he regarded his twisted companions. One of the grotesque figures, its face a twisted mass of scars and bulging features, suddenly lunged forward, its grimy hands closing around a struggling victim. The figure pinned captive to the ground, its voice dripping with sadistic glee as it hissed, "Let me play with you." The MC cast a fleeting glance at the disturbing scene unfolding before him, his eyes widening slightly as he took in the struggling victim and the twisted figure pinning her down. Yet he didn't flinch, didn't stir, and didn't even consider intervening. Instead, he simply shrugged off the horror his thoughts echoing with a callous indifference. Not my problem. Our waifu candidate's slender body writhed and twisted, her delicate features contorted in a desperate bid for freedom. Despite the dire circumstances, the MC couldn't help but notice the girl's striking beauty, her petite frame and angular features imbuing her with a fierce, fragile allure. The grotesque figure cackled with sadistic glee, its eyes gleaming with malevolence as it taunted the struggling girl just a bit longer. The onlookers, their faces aglow with an unsettling enthusiasm, giggled and snickered amongst themselves, their creepy smiles twisting their features into grotesque masks. It was as if they had been the outcasts and misfits of their former lives, ridiculed and belittled in the harsh social hierarchy of high school, and now they reveled in the misery of others, their laughter dripping with malice. The MC's patience finally wore thin, and he let out a deep, exasperated sigh. His voice, laced with a mix of annoyance and warning, cut through the cacophony of laughter. "Don't," he said, his single word hanging in the air like a challenge. The protagonist's mind recoiled in disgust, and he felt a wave of detachment wash over him. He thought to himself, this can't be real. It's all just an illusion, a twisted fantasy concocted to torment me. The notion brought a fleeting sense of comfort, but it did little to alleviate the sense of unease that had taken hold of him. In a sudden burst of adrenaline, the MC shook off his doubts and sprang into action. With a fierce determination, he charged towards the twisted scene, his eyes fixed on the ugly brute. Seizing the grinding stone, he brought it down with crushing force, smashing the brute's head with a sickening crunch. The girl, now freed from her tormentor's grasp, stumbled backward, her eyes wide with shock and gratitude. As the MC stood there, his chest heaving with exertion, a maelstrom of thoughts swirled through his mind. The events that had just transpired seemed to blur and distort, like a painting smeared by a wet brush. He felt a creeping sense of unease as he wondered, was any of this real? Or was it all just a meticulously crafted illusion, a simulation designed to manipulate and deceive? Our waifu, still shaken but seemingly unbroken, slowly picked herself up from the ground. Her eyes darted around the room, as if searching for a sense of security or a glimpse of hope. Then, with a quiet determination, she wrapped her arms around the our boy's waist, pulling herself close to him as she positioned herself behind him. The brute, clutching his mangled head in agony, let out a blood-curdling scream. Crimson liquid dripped from the gash, trickling down his face like a macabre waterfall. As he stumbled about, his eyes blazing with a malevolent fury, the brute's scream devolved into a maniacal, pain-fueled tirade. "I'm telling you, you're finished," he bellowed, his voice echoing off the walls. "Don't you know what the master is capable of? You're dead meat. He'll annihilate you, tear you apart, limb by limb." The MC shot back, his voice dripping with disdain. "And who does he think he is, this master?" he sneered, adding, some kind of self-proclaimed deity. "Please, he's nothing but a insignificant, smelly fart in the grand scheme of things." The brute's face contorted in outrage, his eyes bulging with indignation. "You, how dare you?" he spluttered, his voice trembling with rage. "You insolent fool, you actually dare to insult the master." He took a step forward, his massive fists clenched, as if he was itching to strike down the MC for his blasphemy. The room fell silent, with all eyes fixed on the MC. He felt a chill run down his spine as he realized he had crossed a line. His mind racing, he thought to himself, "I'm screwed. I've really gone and done it now." An unsettling hush descended upon the crowd, like a shroud of anticipation, as a figure emerged from the shadows. Dressed in flowing white robes that seemed to glow with an ethereal light, the figure moved with deliberate, measured steps, its presence commanding attention and inspiring an aura of foreboding. The figure's voice was like a gentle breeze on a summer's day, calm and soothing, yet laced with an undercurrent of authority. "Are you done arguing?" the figure asked, its tone devoid of emotion, yet somehow conveying a sense of quiet expectation, as if the very fate of the MC hung in the balance. The figure's calm gaze shifted between the two individuals, its voice taking on a slightly formal tone as it addressed them. "Disciple Lai, Disciple Wang," it said, the name spoken with a quiet authority, as if summoning them to attention. "The Master requests your presence," the figure said, its voice low and measured, the words spoken with a quiet reverence that commanded respect. Now that the formal summons had been issued, the figure's gaze settled on Li Huang, its eyes seeming to bore into his very soul. "Disciple Li Huang," it repeated, the name spoken with a quiet emphasis, as if to remind him of his duty and his place. The brute's face twisted into a cruel grin as he let out a menacing laugh. "You're finished, Li Huang," he sneered, his voice dripping with malice. "Today's your turn to face the music. Your time is up." Li Huang's eyes narrowed, his gaze settling on the brute with a look of disdainful annoyance. His expression was a mask of irritation, as if the brute's very presence was an affront to his patience. Just as the tension between Li Huang and the brute was about to escalate, a firm hand grasped Li Huang's sleeve, pulling him back. The sudden restraint was a stark contrast to the hostility that had been building, and Li Huang's gaze flicked to the side, wondering who had intervened. It was our Wifo candidate number 1, who had grasped his sleeve, her eyes wide with worry as she gazed up at him. "Don't go, Li Huang," she implored, her voice barely above a whisper, yet filled with a deep concern that was impossible to ignore. Li Huang gently extricated his arm from cute girl's grasp, his eyes locking onto hers for a fleeting moment, filled with a deep affection and reassurance. Then, with a resolute stride, he turned and followed the figure in white towards the light, leaving the cute girl's worried gaze to trail after him. A knowing girl's eyes flashed with a hint of desperation as she trailed after Li Huang, her voice barely above a whisper as she muttered to herself, "There's Candy." Her words were laced with an air of distraction, her gaze fixed intently on Li Huang's retreating back, as if she was driven by a compulsion she couldn't quite explain. It seems like Li Huang is being led away from his waifu by the master's lackey towards a brighter, more enlightened path. Hold up a second. Where's the ugly bastard who started this whole thing? Isn't he going to get reprimanded for the crap he pulled? Or was there a budget cut? The best we're getting is 3 people walking. Enough of this. Let's get back to the story. Li Huang's brow furrowed in confusion as he pressed his forehead, trying to process the whirlwind of events that had just transpired. What just happened to me? He wondered, his mind reeling with questions. Why had he let his emotions get the better of him? Why had he reacted so angrily to the brute's provocations? Questions swirled in his head, leaving him feeling dazed and perplexed. Li Huang's self-reproach deepened, his annoyance with himself simmering just below the surface. My personality is not that flamboyant, he reminded himself, his inner voice stern and critical. He knew he was a man of reserve and composure, not one to be swayed by petty provocations. And yet, he had let his emotions get the better of him. He took a deep breath, resolving to regain control of his temper and not let such trivialities affect his character. The girl's hand drifted out, her fingers brushing against Li Huang's arm, but he didn't flinch. Lost in thought, he was oblivious to her gentle touch, his mind still grappling with the turmoil of his own emotions. I wasn't myself back there, Li Huang thought, a hint of self-awareness creeping into his reflection. I need to calm down and regain my composure. Cute girl's elbow nudged Li Huang's side, a gentle yet insistent prod that broke into his introspection. The persistent woman was not one to be easily deterred, it seemed. Li Huang's hand shot out, his fingers wrapping around girl's wrist in a firm yet gentle grasp. Li Huang's eyes narrowed, his voice low, and even as he growled, "What's wrong with you? Can't you see I'm trying to think? Stop touching me." The girl's hand, still grasped by Li Huang's fingers, slowly opened, revealing a small, mysterious package wrapped in a worn cloth. The B word, eyes sparkled with a mischievous glint as she looked up at Li Huang, her voice sweet and enticing. "Want some candy?" she asked, the package in her hand seeming to tempt him with its secrets. Li Huang's expression softened slightly, his curiosity getting the better of him. "What is it?" he asked, his voice a little gentler as he reached out to take the package from girl's hand. His fingers brushed against hers, and for a moment they touched before he drew back, the package cradled in his palm. "Yeah, I don't think the red stuff is candy, but what do I know?" Her face lit up with a bright, innocent smile. "The master's great," she said, her voice filled with genuine admiration. "He gives us candy." I knew it. The master was giving them something far stronger than candy, something that would blow their minds and send them tumbling down a rabbit hole of hallucinations and made them trip their balls off. Please don't forget to subscribe and give a thumbs up. Our like goal is 100 likes.